Okay, so we're going to start on Masechta Moed Katal. We're starting on the top of the page. We're up to Daf Gimel Amud Beis, page 3, side B. So the Gemara relates that Ki Oso Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi, he went to Israel, and then he came back to Babylonia with the other rabbis. So when Rav Dimi came, as Rashi says, Ki Oso Rav Dimi me'eretz Yisrael leBavel, when he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar, so he said as follows. He gave a statement that he heard in Eretz Yisrael, and he really didn't understand the meaning of this statement. So he went and repeated it to the rabbis, trying to see if they could figure out what is it that was meant by the statement that he said to them. So what does he say? The following was his statement. He said, Yochel Yilka al ha-Tosefes. You might think that one should get lashes for the addition. Addition to what? Lashes for what? He doesn't know. We're going to figure that out. You think, he said, you might think that you could get Malchus for Tosefes, for the addition. And we'll see in the Gemara, there's going to be two interpretations, what it means. But let's wait for the Gemara. But right now, this was the statement. The statement that he heard, that he brought from Israel to Babel, is that you might think that you would get lashes for the extra. So, v'nosiv lo talmuda liptura. And he brought a Talmud, a learning. He learned out from somewhere that it's actually exempt. B'nosiv le talmuda liftura. He brought a Talmud, a learning that it's exempt. You think maybe you should get Malchus for that. And Rashi says, "V'shamid denosiv alei talmuda liftura," and he says, "But v'lo yodaino my Tosefes v'lo petura." I don't know, what does it mean, extra? What does it mean getting Malchus for extra? And I don't know what it means to be exempt. What is this talking about? He says it's unknown to him. He didn't understand. He just knew the statement. The statement said that you might think you get Malchus for the extra, and he brought him a teaching that it's exempt. What is this talking about? Lo yadaino ma talmudo ma Tosefes. I have no idea what is the learning that you learn out what it is. Okay. So now we're going to have two interpretations, how to interpret the statement of what he heard over there. So in the Torah, when it comes to Shvius, and that's why it's brought down over here, because in the Torah, because we're discussing about the 7th year, the Torah specifically writes about cutting, about pruning. It doesn't talk about plowing in the Torah itself. So he calls this plowing extra. Sorry? He calls that extra. By meaning extra, what he means by extra is that this is not written in the Torah. So you might think that you should get Malchus for the extra. The Torah only says that you can't prune and you can't cut. Maybe you think you should get Malchus even for the extra, for Charisha. Rabbi Eliezer says, but they were talking about Charisha. Rabbi Eliezer Charisha, b'shvius. plowing during the 7th year, during the Shemitah year. That is what is the extra. Why is that called extra? Lahachi korilei toisefes. Why is it called this the extra? The loinofik ikore min haTorah. Because the main place that we learn out that you can't plow isn't from the Torah. In other words, the Torah doesn't say don't plow. Elo miklal uprat uklal. We learned this out because a klal uprat uklal keda amri li'il. We said earlier there is a klal. The Torah says rest, and then it says specifically not to cut and not to prune. And then it says again to rest. So there's a klal uprat uklal. So we said everything that is similar, just like you're not allowed to do pruning, you can't do charisha. That's why we call the charisha extra. And this is what the statement that he quoted, what they were saying. Yochel yilkal charisha, you might think that you would get malchus for plowing. Yochel yilkal charisha, you might think you should get malchus for plowing. Why? The asya miklal uprat uklal, because we learn it from a klal uprat uklal. That's a way we learn out from the Torah. When we have a klal uprat uklal, it gets the same halachas as the Torah. So you might think that if a person will plow on Shviz, since we learn it out from the klal uprat uklal, he will get malchus. But no. The nosiv lei talmuda liftura. So they brought him a learning to exempt it. Kedamrinon, Rashi says, Kedamrinon hani ein. The pasuk earlier we learned in the Gemara before that you will not get lashes for charisha, because the Gemara said only this is only midrabanan. The Gemara said earlier that this is a limud from the pasuk that we learn out that that you're exempt. And how do we know that? The imkain. Because if we should say you would get malchus, Roy is joining us, good. The imkain, if so, that you would, the havi loki, that you would get malchus, kol hani proti, then we wouldn't need all the details. The porit behedye, the osur b'shviz, the Torah specifies clearly that it's also b'shviz. We say zeriya, sowing, zimur, pruning, ketzira, cutting the grain, ubetzira, cutting the grapes. Why would lamali? Why does the Torah have to write this? But the reason is lamali the kosar rachmana. Why did they have to write this? Ela lememra, just to tell us the ahanachu the loke v'chulu. On this you get malchus. Shma mino, so we learn from this, you don't get malchus. Let me just review this quickly for Roy to catch you up to speed over here. And by the way, it's very important that when we learn, we should also have in mind for a zechus, Torah has a special power that it protects. Torah is considered like a miklat, and we as a Jewish people, we're all in it together. We all know what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, and it's incumbent upon us to learn more, to do more mitzvahs, to do on the spiritual level, in addition to all the help we can help by supporting Israel morally, by financially, and but we also have to support Israel on a spiritual level, doing more Torah, doing more mitzvahs. So therefore, the class is also dedicated to the well-being and the freedom of the captives and the refuah, the healing for those who were injured, and also all the families that lost loved ones. And this barbaric savages that, I mean, this is unheard of, since the olden days we heard about these things, but this is the ISIS that we have to deal with. But our learning is important. That's why I'm glad that we can continue this class and to learn it for the zuchus, for these people. So just to catch you up on what we were saying over here, this Rabbi Dimi, he brought along a statement which he didn't understand exactly what that meant. And his statement, he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he basically said that you might think to get Malchus for addition. So he quoted him a Gemara, a learning that it's not so. What's going on here? What does it mean? So one interpretation is from Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says what we're talking about is about plowing on Shviz. Because plowing on Shviz is not mentioned beferish in the Torah. That's something which we learn out because of a klal upratu klal. This is one of the ways, we say before the davening, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, we say klal upratu klal, which is one of the ways to learn out Torah prohibitions. Normally, when something is learned out from a klal upratu klal, then it gets the same law as the Torah says. The Torah gives Malchus for the details that it writes specifically. So anything that you include from the klal upratu klal would get the same punishment as well, would get the Malchus as well, because you learn it out from a klal upratu klal. So he says that you might think that the plowing, which is not mentioned in the Torah, but we learn it out from a klal upratu klal. Now, what is a klal upratu klal? The Torah starts off by saying you must rest during the 7th year. That's a general rest, meaning everything. Then the Torah specifies 4 different things that you can't do. You can't cut, you can't, the grapes, you can't prune, can't sow. The Torah specifies the specifics. And then it says at the end that you have to rest. So there's like a klal uprat uklal. And therefore, we should include also plowing. So that's why the idea was you thought maybe you should be chayiv lashes. But he taught him no, because this is not, if the Torah meant it as a klal uprat uklal, that you should include charisha, then the Torah didn't have to write so many details. It could have said one thing. Why did the Torah write each one of these separate zriya, zimu, ktsira, b'tzira, to tell you that only this and charisha you're potter? That's what he learned. So that's one way of interpreting the statement that he heard, that he brought along. But Rabbi Yochanan Omar, he says something totally different. Technically, when we say about addition, we're talking additional time before the 7th year. Even in the 6th year, there are certain things that we shouldn't be doing in the 6th year either, because of it is beneficial to the 7th year. It looks like for the 7th year. We'll see. So he says, if you should violate the prohibitions before the 7th year, in the 6 years, so he's basically saying you might think that you should get lashes for that. He tells you no. So what is the addition? So he says like this. Rabbi Yochanan says, Yomim shoyisifu hachamim lifnei Rosh Hashanah. We're talking about here the days that our sages added before Rosh Hashanah. Shvi is the 7th year, begins with Rosh Hashanah. But our sages added days before Rosh Hashanah. And Rashi explains, Yomim Shalifnei Rosh Hashanah, days of Shal Shviz, of the 7th year. Shehu Toisefes ala Shviz, that is extra. That's what we call it, Toisefes. That is the extra. That's more. We have the 7th year. And these are days that precede the Shviz. They're in the 6th year. And this is what the statement is saying. You might think that you should get lashes for the edition before Rosh Hashanah, the edition that precedes Rosh Hashanah. What is this thing about before Rosh Hashanah? It's not the 7th year. But he said, because he says, the Asya mibachodish ubakotzir tishbos. Where do we learn out that before Rosh Hashanah there is addition? We learn it out from the pasuk. It says, "You shall rest from plowing and from cutting." It's interesting. That's a pasuk which is actually talks about Shabbos, the simple pshat. But for Shabbos, we don't need it because it's one of the 39 melachas. Why does the Torah have to write b'chodesh u'b'kotzir tishbos especially? So we say that pasuk is actually talking not about Shabbos, it's talking about Shviz. But on Shviz itself, we don't need a pasuk that you're not allowed to plow, or at least cut, because the Torah already writes it not to, that you have to rest in the field. Why would it have to say this? So we're saying that this applies to before Shviz. This is the Tosefes, the addition before Rosh Hashanah. We are going to add these days that you can't also in those days plow and cut. The Osi mibachodesh u'bakotzir. He says, Kid'amar lekamon. The Gemara will say this later on. Rashi quotes from the Gemara later on. Im einoi inyan l'shviz. We don't need this pasuk for Shviz itself. Shari ksiv sotcha le'sizra b'charmecha le'sizmar. It already says your field you shall not sow, and your orchard you should not prune. Why do we need to say that you should rest? I mean, it's just interesting. We're not going to go into that, but the pasuk talks about plowing over here too. It says chodesh u'bakotzir. We're talking about the generally. Why would we need another pasuk to tell us not to do malacha on a Shviz when the Torah already says beferish sotcha le'sizra b'karmecha le'sizmar? And the Gemara says tenehu le'inyan shishis shenichnas le'shviz. So therefore, you should put it for the subject that we're talking about, the 6th year, that later on enters into the 7th year, which means things that you do in the 6th year that is beneficial, that enters into the 7th year. The Torah is telling you b'chodesh u'b'kotzir tishbos that you shall cease from doing that work on the 6th year. For the benefits to the 7th year, you have to stop also. The b'shviz nami osur. That the isur is not for shishis. The isur is for shviz. That on shviz you cannot benefit from the shishis that you've done. For the shviz, you cannot benefit on the shviz. So work that you do on the 6th year that enters to the 7th year, that's not allowed to be used on the shviz. So he thought that maybe you would get malchus for that. But he told him, the nosiv lo talmuda lipatura, but he brought him the learning to exempt this, like the Gemara is going to say later on, that Gomar Shabbos Shabbosim Shabbos Bereshis. We learn Shabbos Shabbosim from Shabbos Bereshis, Shabbos Shabbosim that is written by Shviz, and Shabbos Shabbosim that is written by the Shabbos Bereshis, meaning the sixth day, the seventh day of the week. This is the seventh day of the year. Shabbos Bereshis, seventh day of the week. So just like by Shabbos, Shabbos, and by Bereshis, you're not going to get the punishments for if you do the work before Shabbos. In the Tosefes Shabbos, you don't get punishment for that. You also don't get malchus for the work that you benefit on the Shvi'is from the work you did on the sixth year. That's how he explains it. So first, we're saying about days that are before Rosh Hashanah. Friday Gemara, Ma Yomim Shalifnei Rosh Hashanah. What is these days that are before Rosh Hashanah that we're talking about over here? He's saying to him the days that precede Rosh Hashanah. What are those days? How many days? What are we talking about? And the Gemara answers Kiditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Ad Mosai Chorshin Bizdei Ilon Erev Shvi'is. Up till when? Even though we said before, you don't get Malchus for Charisha, but it's definitely Asur Midrabanan Charisha. So how, up to what? Up to when can you do plowing in the fields? And here we're talking about a Zdei Ilon. There is basically a Zdei Ilon and there is Zdei Lavan. There is a tree field and there is a white field. A white field means where you sow grain. A Zdei Ilon means where you plant trees. So how, up to when can you plow on a Zdei Ilon? So so a field that you grow trees, how up to when can you plow the field? Erev Shvi'is, before the seventh year. So Beis Shammai say, Kozman sheyofel pri, as long as it's beneficial to the fruit which is right now in the fields. Which means in the sixth year, for the fruits of the 6 years, for as long as that plowing is beneficial for that year's fruit, the minute it's not beneficial for that year's fruit, then you're not allowed to plow anymore, because then it's obvious that you're plowing it for next year, for the Shvi'is year. But for as long that it's good, sheyofel lepri, that it's good for that year's fruit, you can plow. Kozman sheyofel lepri, zokt Rashi, kloimar, to say, Kozman shacharisha yofel leperis shagodlu bishishis. For as long as the plowing that you're doing is good for the fruit that grew on the 6th year, if that plowing is beneficial for that fruit, then it's okay. And he says, "Dahainunami korev le'atzeres." That's also, it's a little earlier, but it's close to Shavuos. As long as it's still before Shavuos, it's good for the fruit of that year. Avol mikan ve'elach, but after that time that is no longer beneficial for the 6th year, loy, you're not allowed to plant anymore. Why? The havi kimesakin pedis shvi'is, because that is like you're fixing the fruit of shvi'is. You're plowing now for the benefit of the fruits of the shvi'is. So you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to plow your field on the shishis to benefit the fruits of shvi'is. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel say, Ad ha'atzeres. They say up till Shavuos. A little bit later, up till Shavuos. And Rashi says, Ukroivim divrei elu liyes ki divrei elu. The words of these, Beis Shammai is close to the words of these. Beis Hillel, it's the same, almost the same time. That is as far as plowing a Zdei Ilon. That's as day Elon. Now, vad mosai choshim zdei halovon erev shviz. Up to when can you plow a white field, meaning a grain field, before shviz? Rashi teaches us zdei halovon is shel tavua. That means grain. That's the as opposed to trees. This is grain. So he says mishetichle halecha. Once the moisture is gone from the earth, what does it mean? And we'll see that's also, there's a time that there's still moisture in the ground. As long as there's moisture in the ground, then the plowing that you're doing helps that crops of that year. But once the moisture is gone, then plowing doesn't do anything. You're not allowed to plow because, again, it looks like you're plowing for the grain that will grow in the next year. Even though he's not going to plant later on, because you can't plant it on there. The tree grows by itself, but this is not going to grow on its own. But it appears like you're trying to plow for the next year because there is no benefit for this year. Let's look at the Rashi. Shetichla halecha, when the moisture is gone. So Rashi shekolin hageshamim shel shana shishis, that the rains of the 6th year have ceased, they've ended. So there's no benefit to plowing the ground. Up till that time, when there's still rainwater, plowing helps for the sowing of that year, for what you sowed that year. But once the moisture is finished, there's no more rain. He is not allowed to, he's not able to plow anymore. Why? It appears, even though he's not really plowing them, but it appears. Now, when is that time? When is that time? We say when the moisture is over. So he says, the Hainu Kolzman Shebnei Odom Chorshim Lita Makshois. That's the time that people will plow to plant the squash and cucumbers on the shuim and luyim. Those are turnips and squash, whatever. I'm not sure exactly the translation, but it's always in the Gemara, kishuin and luyim, makshoy lois. But I think it's squash and turnips or whatever. But that's something which does not really take the people planted at the end of the season. So is still enough moisture that you plant them, then you can plant. But once that period people no longer plant it, then you can't do it anymore. So in other words, according to this idea, everybody would stop plowing the field after they finished planting their makshos and madlois, their kishuin and their diluyim. So Rabbi Shimon is not happy with that because Rabbi Shimon doesn't like the fact that everybody will have their own time to, let's say one person does it this time, one person does it that time, and everybody will have a different time. We have to make a set time for he calls it here zucchini. I guess zucchini and squash, whatever it is. Zucchini and squash is the right said term, zucchini and squash. So anyways, so Reb Shimon says, that means that you've given the Torah for each and every person in his hand Everybody has to make his own decision when to stop plowing. This one plants his squash and zucchini at one time, the other one does it at another time. So we can't do that. As Rashi says, Torah is given a measure for each one in his hand. You've given your words to different measurements. Because sometimes one person will plow before his friend to plant these makshois, the zucchini, and you're going to tell him, okay, from that point you can't plow anymore. And the other guy does it later, he can do it later. So it doesn't really fit to give a different time for everybody. Elo makes it very clear. Bizdei halovon is Ada Pesach. Up to Pesach. Up to Pesach, you can plow, and when you plow, it's beneficial for that year. But not after Pesach, because there's already not enough moisture, and therefore it looks like you're plowing for the next year. And when we're talking about a field where you have planted trees, over there is Ado Atzeres, up there is till Shavuos, because by the tree, since it's already planted, it doesn't need so much moisture, and therefore the plowing helps it all the way up to Shavuos. Sdei Alovan only up to Pesach, and Sdei Ilon up till Shavuos. So what do we see over here from this? What does it come out? That what does it mean days before Rosh Hashanah? And we said before, he asked, what are the days before Rosh Hashanah? He says, Ma Yomim Shalifnei Rosh Hashanah. What are the days before Rosh Hashanah? What are we talking about? So now we know it's Sdei Ilon by a tree, it's Shavuos, Atzeres, and by a field, Sdei Lovan is Pesach.
Could you say that there's a difference between trees and regular plants, because the regular plants, they're not going to grow, or whatever they grow, but you don't want your tree to die during the Shemitah year because that, or during the at any point, because you're going to need that for the year after. So you want to take care of it to the last minute.
It looks like the plowing of the field, is not a death sentence for the tree. It looks like it's an improvement for the tree. It's not like it's going to die, number one. And number two, if it is work, we'll see in a minute, if it's work that it looks like you're working it for the seventh year, like on the seventh year, it's obvious you're not allowed to plow, right? On the seventh year itself. So you're going to have the same argument, the tree's going to die. So I don't think the tree is going to die. It's meant for improvement. But if you stop from Shavuos instead of stopping from Rosh Hashanah, it's not going to make that much a difference in the tree's life. But in any event, he says that, we'll see in a minute, the Gemara actually takes issue. Amar Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Shimon ben Pazi said, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Meshum Bar Kapora, in the name of Bar Kapora, son of Kapora. He said like this, that Rabban Gamliel ubeis dinoi nimnu al shnei prokim halalu. Rabban Gamliel and his court, they counted. Whenever they wanted to go for a vote, they said count it. They went for a vote. Who is for who's the yay and who's the nay, who's the for it or not. So Rav Gamliel and his Beis Din, they counted, they made a vote al shnei prokim halolu about these two periods, the period of Pesach and the period of Atzeres that we've just discussed. And they voted on it. Al shnei prokim, Zok Rashi, the Pesach v'Atzeres, a Pesach and Shavuos. Ubitlum. And they negated it. They nullified it. They say, the Bitlum, Zok Rashi, the Chorshim ad Rosh Hashanah, you can plow up to Rosh Hashanah. So they said, no, we don't have to stop. You can plow up to Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so B'chlal, they took away this whole thing, and you can plow it. So, Amalei Rav Zeda Rav Abahu. So Rav Zeda says to Rav Abahu, the Amrila, as I said, Rav Shlokish says to Rav Yechanan, how could they do such a thing? Rabban Gamliel ubeis dinoi, Rabban Gamliel and his court. How are they able to negate, nullify a Beishamai, an institution that was instituted by Beishamai Besilom? They said they were Tanoim of the earlier years, and they had a bigger court than they had the more wiser, and you cannot reject an earlier court's decision unless you have a greater court in numbers and also in wisdom, which they didn't have. So if the Gemara asks, Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dina, how could Rabbi Gamliel in his court, how could they negate and nullify the institution of Bisham Hillel, which they said, okay, close to Atzeres and Pesach, this is something that they said. Takanta the Sham of Hillel, that Reb Shimon, the Omar at Pesach v'ad Atzeres, because Reb Shimon before that said, up till Pesach and Atzeres, B'hainu aliba, the Bishama B'Hillel. That's according to Bishama B'Hillel. So how could they? I mean, he didn't say on his own. He said, when he said Zdei Alovan, this was a statement of Reb Shimon Pesach, but he didn't say it on his own. He was saying it based on the words of Bishamai and Beis that we learned before. That Bishamai says Adat Tzedek, Beis Hillel says Tzedek, and Bishamai. So it's all the earlier Tanoim. So Reb Shimon said it, and Li Bisham Beis Hillel. This goes according to Bisham Beis Hillel. But Tanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, Ein Beis Din Yochel Levatul Divrei Beis Din Chaveri. One court cannot nullify the words of a court, its court of its friend, its other court, Elohim Kain Godel Mimenu B'Chochma B'Binyan, unless the new court is greater, both in wisdom and in numbers. So the only way the second court can come and Mavatlit, they need to be greater in numbers. But we know that they weren't greater in numbers. So how could they be Mavatl it? The Gemara uses the language of the Pasuk, Ishtoimim Kishochad. He was shocked for a moment. He didn't know what to answer, He asked him the question. So Ishtoimim Kishochad. It's the language of Daniel, used the language of the Pasuk. And then when he came to Amar Lev, so he said to him like this, Amar, I will tell you, Kach Hisnu B'neim, that this was actually what they made a condition amongst themselves. In other words, when they made the decree in the first place, they didn't make it an absolute, but they said at the time, that if any rabbi or any court will want to come later on and negate it and nullify it, let them come. So, in other words, not nullifying the words of the other rabbis, but to begin with, that was the condition that they have the right later on to negate it if they want to. So Rashi says, "Kachisnu Shama v'Hillel b'shas takanosim." That was the condition of Shama v'Hillel when they instituted it. So the Gemara is now surprised at the statement that we're saying that this was instituted by Shammai and Hillel. The Gemara quotes that this is actually based on Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. For the Gemara, did who he? This is their. They've instituted it. Did who he? Takanosam he. It's their institution. Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. That's been passed along, the law to Moshe from Sinai till these times of Shavuos and Pesach. The Omar Abbas Yom Rabbi Yechon Mishum Rabbi Nechuni Ish Bichas Beis Churton. Rabasi said the name of Rabbi Yechonon, who said in the name of Rabbi Nechunya, the man from the valley of Beis Churton, which is Mokoim, it's the name of a place. And he talked about three halachas, which are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What was it? He says, Eser Netiyas, the 10 plantings, and the Arova, the willow which you circle the Mizbeach, the Nitzuch HaMayim, and the libation of water, is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's a law passed down from Moshe from Sinai. So basically, the law of Eser Netiyas has to do with this plowing before the new year. Let's see Rashi. Eser Netiyas. What is the Eser Netiyas? That is Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. Yud Netiyas. So the Rashi says, if you have 10 plantings, Hamefuzoris B'toich Beiso, that are scattered within an area called a Beiso. The area of Beiso is Shehi Nun al Nun. That's 50 amas by 50 amas. That's the size of a Beiso. Choirshin kol hasode shelo bishvilon. So you're allowed to plow the entire field for them be'erev shvi'is ad Rosh Hashanah, on the eve of Shvi'is till Rosh Hashanah. Eser Netiyas, if you have 10 Netiyas, you can plow all the way to Rosh Hashanah. V'amri hani. And they say that hani, that these hoil v'ilo the same, since they're young, ikab seida yiseda. So there's a big loss. Lekach chorshin ad Rosh Hashanah. That's why you can plow up to Rosh Hashanah, because there is they have a strong need to plow them so that they can, similar to the idea you said before, Roy, to help the loss of them, because they're young and they'll get lost. Aval zikena, but an older planting, ein chershim ad Rosh Hashanah. You don't plant until Rosh Hashanah. Where does this difference come from? It says halacha l'Moshe Sinai, almod halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So you see that the prohibition for others is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's not something which was by Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Okay. By the way, what is the Arova? It was a custom by the Beis Hamikdash to all the 7 days of Sukkah to circle the Mizbeach with the Lulav Arova. The Peri talks about circling the Mizbeach with a willow during the Sukkot festival. Also, Nitzuch HaMayim, the law that we put Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the fact that you have a libation of water, is Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. So the question is, how could we say that Hillel and Shammai made it, and you're saying that therefore we have a right to override their ruling because they initially made the takana that if somebody wants to overrule them, it's okay. But it's b'chlal not their takana; it's Allah l'Moshe Messinai. So Rabbi Yitzchak answers. He says, "Ki gemiri hilchas shloishim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah." The halacha told us 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, you're not allowed to plow. Only 30 days. Now they came and they added, when they have the halacha that you don't plow to a older planting up to Rosh Hashanah, but you could plant up to 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. So the limit was 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. That was the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But they came along and they added time, the Osuhami, and these people came, which is Beishamai and Beisilom, Tikun me Pesach v'Atzeres. But also betakona didhu, they came with their takona, the Hirchiku, they made it further away. Ada Pesach, Ada Atzeres, till Pesach, until Shavuos. V'asnu b'didhu, and for their addition, they made the condition. Kol hareitza levatel yovei v'yevatel. Anybody who wants to come and be mevatel, let him come and be mevatel. So therefore, Rabbi Gamliel the bottle and this that Rabbi Bittel, Rabbi Gamliel and his based in the mevatel, le bittel elo me Pesach u me Atzeres ad shloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah. They only were mevatel it for 30 days up to Rosh Hashanah, and therefore that was okay. Okay, let's leave it over here, and we'll end with a prayer again that Hashem should send all of His help for the people in Eretz Yisrael and for Jews all over the world. Lahine layonu v'layishon shomer Yisrael. Hashem, the Garden of Eden, does not sleep, not slumber. Now, I know we all wonder how could things like that happen. We don't know explanation, but it doesn't really change our emunah and our complete trust in Hashem that He won't allow for any more tsuras, and He will protect the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, the diaspora, and give our soldiers the koach and the army to defeat and annihilate the enemy totally, like Amalek, Moche Timcha Zecher Amalek, and we will celebrate and we will be able to, as the pasuk says, Ushchaftem ve'in machrid, we'll be able to lie down without worries, not to have to worry that when you go to sleep, somebody's going to come and attack you and kill you. And it's really a trying time, but in Mitzvah Hashem, we should see Hashem's open miracles. And the Rebbe would always say that Israel is still the safest place in all of the world, notwithstanding what happened and what's going on over there. It looks like kind of scary when